Welcome to My Counselor Live. We are so happy that you're here today and joining us. I'm Tori, and today I have the pleasure of getting to speak with Shaun, one of our incredible, such great counselor here at MCO. He's so awesome and so knowledgeable and wise about so many different things and topics, and we get to cover some really heavy but really important topics today. So Shaun, I want to start by just handing it over to you, letting you introduce yourself to the people who are tuning in who don't know who you are.
Okay, well, I appreciate the flattering introduction. I'll try to live up to all of those things, but I've been a counselor here specifically with MCO for the past 11 years. I've been a licensed counselor now for about 15 years, working with people. I do a lot of work with couples, a lot of work with infidelity, affair recovery, issues of recovery from pornography use. And so I'm just really passionate about that, passionate about helping people, helping couples heal. I love the work that I get to do.
Yeah, no, it's such important work. And I feel like, especially, and I know we've talked about this before, and I've talked about this some with Josh and some other counselors, but it's not talked about much when it comes to, Christian counseling and in the church. These kinds of things are so important to discuss. And I just
really
love
are.
your heart for it as a believer. And I think it's important that we talk about it. So we're going to kind of jump in to your article.
Well, I want to say one thing before we start, just with
the
church, especially for believers. I think one of the most important things for people to understand is that if you've been through this, you may be told things like, hey, you need to work through forgiveness. You need to move on. And while biblically forgiveness is really, really important, I really just want to start by saying infidelity is a significant attachment injury. And so the pain that you feel, the overwhelm that you feel, really needs to be processed and healed. It's not just a matter of have you forgiven your spouse or not, but there's really some things to process through. So I just like to say that for all the people out there, because a lot of people come into my office and think, this is just about me being able to forgive and move on from my spouse or move on with my spouse. And just want to offer that encouragement that we be attentive to those hurts.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I'm curious, with you being a counselor who really specializes in this, how, common is it for people to come into your office and sit down and maybe think that they're not going to be able to cover it as detailed as they think they're going to because it's Christian counseling? What does it kind of look like as a Christian counselor to work with couples on this?
I think as believers, out of a really genuine heart to want to please God, what a lot of people come in with is a sense of I want to do the right thing. I want to do what's pleasing to God. So for the betrayed spouse, that can be I need to forgive and I need to stay in my marriage. And certainly those things are true, but they don't necessarily in that make room for the pain that they need to heal from and process. And so there's a huge burden there when they are saying, I'm trying so hard to forgive. I'm trying so hard to move forward with my spouse, but I keep having all these flashes of emotion and overwhelm. I can't seem to do it. What's wrong? Do I not, am I not having enough faith? Am I not, trusting in God enough? Am I still struggling to forgive? So that would be on that. And betraying spouses come in a lot of times if they're, remorseful and want to stay in their marriage, they'll say things like, I just need to do what I'm supposed to do. I need to live according to the Bible. And if I just did that, everything would get better. And they're confused, when they come in and go, hey, I'm trying to do that, but things aren't better, and so it's important for them to understand in both cases, this is not a faith issue. This isn't a you don't love the Lord issue. This is like, guys, we have an injury here. We have an injury here. And I'm so glad that you want to do what's honoring to God. And it's all right with God. I think it's part of his plan that we work through healing from what you've been through.
Yeah, no, I think that's so good. And that kind of goes into what we're going to be talking about, which is your article, which is titled After Disclosure. We previously on an episode before got to sit down and talk about your article just on that disclosure and what that looks like, how to do it properly and in a way that is kind and all of that. And this article is kind of the second part of that, which is following the disclosure. What do we do? After all of that is on the table, this is what happened. how do you move forward from that? And
Mhm.
so my first question around that is, what's this article, really uh, about? What is it about as far as, all of that?
Yeah. So the heart behind the article is getting full disclosure out there, which I explained in the beginning of that. Full disclosure is when we, in a planned way, we all sit down and we talk through everything that's happened. We put all the details of the infidelity in the open. It's the moment of truth, if you
And
will.
that's usually done with a
And
counselor.
that's with a counselor. We do that in a planned way. There's so much build up to that, and there's so much focus on the disclosure part. A lot of times people are surprised by what they feel and experience after disclosure. They're not really sure what to do with that. What can I expect? And sometimes people even have a sense, well, we've done disclosure. Shouldn't I be feeling better? Which sometimes is true and sometimes is not. And so the heart of this article is for both spouses to begin to get a sense of, okay, what's common? What can you expect? And what do we do with those things? What do we do those things that are common for people to experience after they've gone through disclosure?
Yeah, and I feel like I know what you're going to say to this question, but like, why did you feel like it was important to kind of write a second part to this
Mhm.
disclosure sort of series?
Yeah, well, it's always been my heart to do some more writing around this. Time-wise, sometimes that's gotten away from me, but when I work with couples, there's a lot of struggle with that time after. And so I really wanted to start having there be resources there from us to people that I'm working with, to others to say, hey, let this be helpful to you. I don't want you to be blindsided by what's happening. I don't want you to be discouraged by what's happening. I want you to see where it fits in the bigger picture of what's going on.
Yeah, no, that's good. And you mentioned both spouses, which I think is interesting in the article, kind of a not perspective, but you're speaking to each one, the
Hmm.
betrayed and the betraying spouse. Why did you feel like
Hmm.
it was important to speak to each rather than just speaking to the betrayed spouse or just speaking to the betraying spouse? Why did you feel
Yeah,
like that was important?
yeah, because both people are healing.
Mm.
Um, the myth is, and I would just say theologically, this is my view, but other people, may not have a biblical worldview. But mine is biblically, sin doesn't just hurt the people we sin against; it hurts us. I would think even I know even secular counselors would say when you do something like betray your spouse, you injure yourself. They might not call it sin, that's fine, but it does damage to you. And so, the way that I think about it, honestly, is, and I referenced that a little bit in the article. I said I really think about it like I'm sitting with two people who've just been in a really bad car wreck,
Mm.
and the reality is in the room that one of them was driving the car recklessly and is the reason that they're there. But that doesn't change the fact that they're both very injured and need to heal. And so the idea that the betraying spouse can wreck the car and not be injured is it's just not a reality.
Mm.
It's not a reality that they're in the place that they need to be. So both people need to be able to heal. And for betraying spouses, a lot of times they might think, well, who on earth cares about my injuries? Who wants to hear about them? And believe it or not, even if your spouse is really, really angry, one of the things that is helpful for them is to actually have some vulnerability from you about how you've been affected and hurt.
Mm.
Contrary to what you might think, no, I just need to hear them. But I tell couples all the time, one-sided intimacy doesn't feel good and it's not healing. So just having them come to you and say, here's how I'm hurting, here's my heart, is really one-sided intimacy. And that's not healing. And so you're actually helping them heal too by saying, you're not going to be the only one who's vulnerable. I'm going to be vulnerable too. That's what brings about healing.
That's good. That's such a good word. And just encouraging to hear. I hope that someone's encouraged hearing that, but will you expand on that relationship betrayal being an emotional trauma? Maybe starting with like, what is an emotional trauma?
Yeah. So trauma's a word probably over the past 20, 30 years that's gotten a lot more common. mostly through things like military actions and things, and soldiers coming home and having PTSD, which is they've been through events that leave them with a tremendous sense of loss, of a threat to their life or ability to exist, a significant loss of control. And on the battlefield, that is easy to see. You're in a situation and you almost die, or you see somebody you love die. And the overwhelmingness of that, we know that the way that our brain processes the emotions of that, because they're so big and it's so intense, it can leave our brain in a spot where it's almost a little bit stuck. Mm-hmm. It's almost like it can't quite process what you've just been through. And so people come back and they have things that are reminders of that trauma, and they feel the same things that they felt when they were out, with their fellow soldiers or in that situation. We know that trauma doesn't just happen on the battlefield. We've used it in talking about people who go through childhood abuse, or maybe they've been sexually assaulted or something like that. Those are all traumas. It's a threat to well-being in life, a total loss of control, a sense of losing your personhood in those moments. It's really, really devastating. And so when it comes to infidelity, it's traumatic because this is a person who has pledged to love and care for you, to be faithful, to be committed, to have you be the one person in their life, and you be the one person in their life. There's an exclusivity, a sacredness. And so what an infidelity does is it takes that bond, that really special attachment that we depend on, that we count on, and it ruptures the attachment. It creates a break, which is extraordinarily overwhelming and disruptive. The emotional upheaval of losing what we call a really primary attachment, not primary, but significant attachment, that rupture is traumatic. It is overwhelming. There's a sense of just absolute out of control. I didn't cause this. I didn't bring this on. Somebody else did this to me. There was nothing I could have done. And so it's experienced by, betrayed spouses as a trauma, as a relationship trauma. And what makes it especially difficult, or I'll use the word complex. Difficult's not a good word. Complex is, unlike some other situations where the person who's injured you is maybe not somebody that you have an attachment with. They're not going to be an ongoing part of your life. You kind of like, they did something awful and you're like, yeah, I don't ever want to be near them again. In this case, the trauma happens at the hands of somebody that you care about, you love, and you may want to continue to have a relationship with. You want to heal that bond with them. So it gets really, really complicated because of that. And it is traumatic. It is overwhelming. And the things that come with it, the floods of emotions, the being reminded of what's happened, being afraid and hypervigilant, like, when are you going to do this again to me? All those things are characteristic of trauma. The person's nervous system is on high alert from that point. It's not going to stay that way if we do the work on it, but understanding that really, for your nervous system, for your brain, it's going into a protection mode. It's going into a protection mode, and so it is a really significant, complex trauma.
Yeah, and that's kind of toward the betrayed spouse and what they might be experiencing. You also mention when you're talking to the betraying spouse, the spouse that is kind of being the person doing the disclosure, you talk about the relief that they might feel getting that off their chest. Can you kind of expand on that, what that is, that relief?
Yeah, so when when a betrayed spouse or anybody has been carrying the secrets, the lies, they live in a state of separation. They live in a state of conflict and being alone, meaning they're in many cases in conflict with themselves. Like, what I'm doing it, but I'm really not truly deeply okay with what I'm doing.
Mhm.
In many cases, there's deep sense of anguish inside with what's going on. They may not actively feel that all the time or let themselves feel that, but they're carrying that inside. And there's an aloneness that comes from dishonesty that is profound.
Mhm.
A disconnect. You are with people, but you are not with them. It creates a separation, an invisible separation. And so when the betraying spouse comes in and says, "Okay, I want to work on this," or "I want to be honest," and they put everything on the table, what they've been carrying on their own, all of a sudden they're not carrying on their own. And that sense of aloneness, of me not being connected or seen, evaporates. And so there's relief that comes from that. There's a relief, not that we're all okay, but almost like, gosh, I'm not alone anymore, or it's not all on me anymore. I'm finally doing the right thing. And so there's a profound relief, which is very much in contrast to how the betrayed spouse feels, because they are dealing with, oh my gosh, you just dumped all this on me. You just put all this on me. And so while you're feeling maybe some relief, I'm feeling crushed.
Right. So how can the spouse that has done the betraying be mindful of that, with their spouse, be kind with that relief?
Well, the first thing I would say is just to be aware that it's a reality. Um, any effort you make as a betrayed spouse or a betraying spouse to understand yourself, what you did, and also understand your partner is very healing. That effort, that being intentional, being willing to go near this, sends a strong message to your partner. It you've hurt them, but it's like you're not going to leave them alone. You're not gonna abandon them. You're going to try to get this. You're going to try to get what they're going through and what you're going through. And so that is so important that you can do that. The other things that you can do, some simple things, is understand that what they're feeling on a day-to-day basis and some of the things that are happening are not things that they're choosing. There really can be a sense sometimes that we pick what we feel. And in the case of trauma, that is definitely not true. If your spouse is having a really difficult day, if they're really sad or they're really angry or they're really hurting, they're not choosing that. They're feeling it because it just is.
Mm.
It is there. It would be like looking at somebody who's had a major surgery or injury and go, "Why are you in pain today?" That was a couple of days ago that you had surgery. And it's like, well, because that's just is what it is. There's a lot of damage there. And some days they may feel that more than others. So having a compassion, a patience, going, okay, it's all right. They're not choosing this. They're not picking this to make it more and more difficult. So what you can do is understand that and respond with kindness and empathy. Kindness sounds, rather than saying I'm sorry or I shouldn't have done it, it sounds more like I want to be here for you.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really hurt you. I know I did. I'm here. It's being there for them. The other thing that is important is when you are experiencing all of what they're going through, if you're the betraying spouse, you need to make sure that you are processing through your own recovery and your own emotions. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to be there for them. What's going to happen is if you're not processing your stuff, what you're going to find is you're either going to get angry in a lot of cases, or you're going to withdraw. And that's both of those do not help your spouse and they don't help you. The anger, in a sense of, oh my gosh, how long do we have to go through this? This is so hard. You're not forgiving me. This is so difficult. All those kinds of things, or just withdraw. I don't want to be around you. It's a drag to be with you. You always bring this stuff up. You're always feeling, can't we have a good day? If we can't have a good day, I'll just be somewhere else. Those are all signs that you're not processing and working through your recovery.
Mm.
And so those are some basic things. I mentioned some more things in the article, but those are a few things that I'd highlight.
Yeah, no, I think that's great practical advice for the
Mhm.
couple, on a day-to-day basis, just depending on what the day holds and what's going on. And what more advice as a counselor do you have for a couple who may be tuning in, or one of the spouses that may be tuning in for
Mhm.
processing their pain.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would want to really encourage people that if we'll actually work to process our pain, pain is not forever.
Mm.
It does get better. It you can heal. Time will not heal that. So I want to say that a lot of times people think that time, if days go by, weeks go by, whatever it is, it will get better. Time doesn't heal processing our emotions, actually feeling them, going into them, learning how to deal with them is tremendously helpful. You will feel better and you'll heal. And so I would just really want to encourage, because there are some days when you're feeling the weight of what you're going through, you can feel really discouraged. And I just want to be an encouragement. I would want to be somebody that maybe you can just imagine leaning into me, just leaning into my confidence, my belief, my certainty that, hey, this gets better. It can get better if you work recovery. You can heal. There's that hope for you.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. I think my last question on this article and on this topic would be, how can a counselor be helpful for someone, for a couple who's going through this?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I was talking to a counselor, I think that counseling is it's a calling. It's something that you have to be passionate about, because helping people is not easy. And so I just really encourage them to be pursuing knowing more specifically about infidelity, reading excellent authors, paying for supervision with people who do infidelity work and do it well, reading the things that they read, going to the trainings that they go to. It's important, because if you're going to help couples in this, because it's complex trauma, you want to make sure that you do that well. And so I just have learned that from other therapists on our team. That's like, when we want to do excellent work, what we do is we go find people who are doing excellent work, and we say, what are you reading? What trainings did you get? What models do you use? How do you go about helping people? And so I'd really encourage therapists to do that. And maybe a final thing, this is just a practical thing, for therapists, that it's really important with betrayal, to give adequate time and space to process trauma, and to not confuse that with unforgiveness or being stuck. Because trauma is difficult, because there's such a depth of emotion and pain to trauma, it can be easy to have a really incorrect timeline in your head as far as how much should this person need to connect with this? How much should they need to process this, to deal with this, talk about this? And so what can happen sometimes is we can assume that trauma resolves much more quickly and without as much connection and processing than it actually does. And so I encourage therapists, don't get in a rush. It takes time.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shaun, for just kind of sharing your heart behind that article and all of the wisdom. And hopefully, people tuning in who maybe have experienced this or know of people who have experienced this,
Mhm.
this was encouragement to them, and great, great advice. So, thank you so much, Shaun. And we're going to jump into kind of our next segment of My Counselor Live, which is our trending topic. What are people talking about? What are people curious about? And for this week, and I thought this was maybe an interesting one to do after talking through that article on infidelity and all of these things, is sex addiction, which is so interesting. I feel like for people that maybe have never experienced this, I mean, it seems so wild, like that would be an addiction, but I would love just your thoughts on, first of all, maybe what this is for those who don't know, and also just how common it is, really.
Mhm. Yeah, so sex addictions is what we'd call a process addiction, which is different than a chemical addiction. So a lot of times when people hear the word addiction, their context is chemical addictions. It's drugs, it's alcohol, it's things like that, literally entering the body, and changing a person's chemistry. That's what they think of. So when they hear sex and addiction, it goes, wait a second, sex drive is normal. You're just somebody who can't control yourself, or you like sex. Process addictions, you get into things like gambling, or working excessively, or in this case, sex. And what we look for with sexual addiction is sex addiction, and some of this is a little bit of my opinion or just my experience in it. But when you look at a sex addiction is sexual behaviors that are happening regardless of negative consequences, or regardless of a person's own moral convictions. So to say that it's like I'm this sexual acting out is disruptive, it's hurting my life, hurting people around me, but I do it anyway. It's maybe against what I believe to be right. It is fundamentally something I'm morally opposed to, yet I continue to do that. And some of the other aspects of it is it has a tendency to be compulsive, meaning the person lacks an ability to manage and control it independently. That's not an excuse, so please don't hear it that way. Our responsibility is to get help. We always have that option. So even if sexual behavior is something that's compulsive, getting help is a choice. But the other thing is sex addiction tends to escalate, meaning a person will notice they need to do more just to get the same high or release, or they will go into the more can be more time, the more can be more stimulus, different novel situations. In the case of things like pornography, a lot of times somebody may start with something that we would consider more traditional, just nudity or something like that, and they progress to watching kinds of pornography that they later go, I never would have imagined watching this. I never would have imagined being aroused by seeing this or that, but I ended up in this, what they would have considered at the beginning an extreme form. So there's an escalation, there's a need for more stimulus, there's an obsessive quality to it. So sex goes from being a function, kind of just a drive that we have, to the thought processes around sex become very obsessive and focused. And so a person goes from sex is a part of my life to sex is my most important need. Sex is central. Sex is important. It is a part of life. But when you get into sex addiction, it goes from being an important part of life to an obsessive and consuming part of life. And as far as the prevalence of this, unfortunately, what we're finding is especially in the areas of any kind of electronic sexual behavior, meaning interacting online with other people, pornography, online strip clubs.
Which is very common now more than ever before.
More than ever before. New thing that we're having people report is with the new VR devices that the pornography industry, unfortunately, uses everything that they can. And with that, what we're finding is we've got a lot of people who have, we have an access to such an easily addictive and consuming behavior that they're getting into trouble. There's a lot more, I would say, of sexually addictive behavior than there ever has been before, thanks to access. And probably the other troubling thing is because of the access, and because even at this point, there are a lot of parents who don't take seriously monitoring their children's access to the world. I have a lot of young adults now who pornography and acting out sexually, and maybe it is through only pornography, but that has now become interwoven with their sexual development. From the time that they hit puberty, pornography was a part of their sexual development. So they, in a sense, have grown up with it, which is really problematic when they go to have relationship with real people. And when they want to have a satisfying sexual connection with that person and enjoy that and intimacy, because the way that pornography and those kinds of things shape our sense of sexuality is it really, really distorts it into primarily novelty, stimulus seeking, non-intimate kinds of sexual gratification. That has a really profound effect on someone's sexual development.
Yeah, right. So say someone is listening today and kind of can pick themselves out as someone who maybe does have a sex addiction, does have this process disordered addiction that you mentioned, and what can be done? How do you kind of heal that or prevent it? What are the next steps for that person?
Yeah, so really getting help is the next step. If you're in an addictive place, or maybe you've grown up with these kinds of things in your life, understanding and that you can't do this on your own, that's really important. That this is not something that you have control of, it's something that's controlling you. And so the very first thing is say, hey, you need to get help. And help, usually when it comes to sex addiction, we're looking at things like it's going to be a mix of counseling, and it's also going to be, I really am a strong advocate of 12-step groups. And I know when I say that, a lot of times, I can hear, the reaction, oh, I don't want to do that. That'd be so embarrassing. I would just tell you that is so necessary and so powerful in really moving you into a place of victory. And what I have found is when we get involved in those groups and we form a relationship in those groups, what was once shameful becomes this area where we have incredible support, incredible encouragement, and tremendous victory. And so I know it's hard in the beginning, but it is so worth it. And I would just say this, to that individual, I'd say, listen, you probably feel tremendous shame, but I just want to convey to you that I don't feel shame towards you. The people that you would go to in those groups, whether it's a men's group or women's group, if it's a good group, they're not going to shame you. They don't feel that way towards you. They don't have any interest in judging you. They want to help you. They want to help you succeed. And so I just want to share that encouragement.
Yeah, no, and I think that is great encouragement to share, because I'm sure that around this topic, there can be a lot of shame and a lot of fear of judgment. And so I love that you mentioned that, and hopefully that was able to really encourage someone and maybe inspire them to go and seek that support that they need. So
yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, with that, we're going to kind of jump into our last segment of the episode, which is our Q&A segment, which is my personal favorite part, just because that's when we get to interact with you guys. We get to interact with the listeners and viewers and answer your questions that you're sending in. So these are questions that you've sent in either through Facebook, in the inbox on YouTube, or maybe at MyCounselor.Online/ask. And we're going to answer a few of these. If you think of any along the way, feel free to shoot us a message and we'll answer your question in a future episode. But for now, we're going to talk through a few of these questions. And we did talk before we started, Shaun, that a lot of them are kind of around sex therapy, which, I think that that's something that you have a good understanding about. And I definitely would love to get your thoughts on some of these questions that people have sent in. So the first one comes to us and she says, how do I reintroduce sex as a widow? So, if she, has been married, passed away, and is now remarried, how do you reintroduce that part of your life again?
Yeah. So what I would, recommend to somebody in your situation would be grief is takes time, and grief is also, it comes in phases. And it's a little bit surprising to people that grief comes again sometimes with new birth, meaning that we grieve. Other waves of grief hit us as we maybe start something new, a new relationship, or enter into, our new marriage. And as a part of that, we enter into a new sexual relationship. And so what I would want to say to you is taking time to process this deeper healing that you're experiencing, because that's really what it is. I don't want it to be discouraging. As you grieve, it's not, you're not finished. It's more like, oh, this is a deeper level of healing, because previously that sexual part of your life was shared with the person you lost.
Yeah.
And so now, as you stand on the threshold of beginning that of a new birth, you may find yourself needing to go back and process some, at the graveside, at the loss, and go, okay, emotion is coming up for me. So I just really encourage you to take time with that, be gentle with that, and everything that comes up. And I hope that your spouse is supportive of that, and not personalizing what you're experiencing, not making it about them, that somehow there's something wrong with them, or they're lacking in some way, or you love your old spouse and not them. If they struggle with that, they need to get some help around that and process that. But for them to be able to go, okay, this isn't about me. This is about deeper healing for my spouse.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great answer. And I think that definitely gives the answer that this person is needing. And yeah, that's a hard situation. I mean, it's difficult. And I appreciate your tenderness in answering that, Shaun. So let's jump into this next question, which is, my husband is on antidepressants and can't orgasm. Is that normal? What should we do?
Yeah. So we always advise in sex therapy and working with people that if you're on a medication, you need to be talking with your doctor. Talk with them about what you're experiencing, because there's a number of things that can go into not being able to orgasm. So you want to talk with him or her, because they're going to want to know, I mean, has this been a problem historically for you? When did this start? What's your age? Do you have any other kind of outstanding medical conditions? All those kinds of things. In addition, maybe to looking at, is this antidepressant new and it's causing this? Because sometimes that can happen. You start a new, depression medication and it interferes sexually. Is that something you've been on for a long time? Is it that at all? And so we really encourage people to talk with your doctor, let them walk you through that, because they're going to try to find out if it really is the antidepressant, or if it's any number of other things that it could be.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's a hard question to answer, just because there's not a lot of detail, and because, we aren't doctors. And so definitely,
we aren't doctors, but we recommend using them. So that would be one that I would really encourage you to go talk to your physician.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Kind of off of that question, if the doctor says, yeah, like that can happen, do you have any advice as, someone who does understand sex therapy, for them to, I guess, pursue, a different route or something like that? Any advice for them?
So what I tell people is, sometimes we forget that doctors are people and they're service providers. And so you should have a sense with your physician. Are they engaged in helping me? I just say, if their response is pretty flippant, or like, oh, that happens sometimes, let's move on, then, you really may want to consider advocating for yourself with them, going, hey, but I want to figure this out. Or going, okay, this person shouldn't be my doctor. Because I know, working with physicians I know personally, other people, like, good physicians want to help you figure it out. It doesn't mean that they're going to find every answer or anything like that, but they're engaged in what matters to you. And so what I find where people get in trouble is they don't advocate for themselves, either by saying, hey, I want to figure this out, not just, oh, this sometimes happens, or they don't feel free to advocate for themselves in the sense of choosing a new physician.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's such good advice. So
Mhm.
hopefully that is a good answer to the person who asked this question. It's a great question, vulnerable question,
Mhm.
but good to talk about. It's great to talk about. So last question before we kind of wrap things up today, Shaun, is I have been single for a long time now. After 3 years, I'm finally in a healthy relationship. Only problem is I don't get sexually aroused by him. I feel like I've lost my sexual drive.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so difficult to have that, and I think I would want to start out by saying you may have lost contact with it, but you haven't lost it.
Mm.
So just know that's kind of hardwired into you. So that's good. It's not something that can just fall off or we lose. We may lose touch with it though. So again, without getting too into the details, because I don't know your situation, there can be a lot of reasons that that happens. Sometimes in seeking to honor God and save sex for marriage. Sometimes what happens is people almost kind of turn off their sexual drive because they don't want to step outside of or ahead of God's timing. They're like, it's not time for that. I don't want to go there. And so, without meaning to, they start to almost create a shutdown inside themselves where any sexual feelings or thoughts or arousal or anything like that, they basically kind of box it up and go, I'm not going to allow that because I don't want to. I don't want to end up doing something I don't want to do. And it gets really hard as they enter a relationship with somebody and they want to connect. It's almost like this is kind of hard to unbox. Now that it's time to unbox it, it's like I can't get it out or I can't find it. Okay. And so, that can often happen. There are other things that can go into that. I'm going to assume that it's not an attraction thing. Sometimes people can genuinely, maybe there's a medical issue or something going on where you're struggling to be attracted to your spouse. You love them as a person, but struggling physically or emotionally. Maybe you're not connecting emotionally with them and you don't feel drawn to them sexually. I'm going to assume it's none of those things and just go with the first one. Um, that a really good thing for you to do uh, 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 I would say Cliff and Joyce Penner, A Celebration of Sex, or no, that's Doug Rosenau, Dr. Doug Rosenau. That's a really good book. And also a good read would be Restoring the Pleasure. Both of what these books are going to do is going to give you some good sexual information and knowledge. But what they're also going to walk you through is how to start engaging that part of yourself with your spouse. One of the most important things to know about sex is one of the ways that we know that we want to be sexual is like the internal drive, meaning you feel like you want to be sexual. You feel a drive, right? And some days you might feel that, and other days you don't. And what happens is when we shut down kind of our sex drive a little bit, that kind of maybe we put a damper on that. And so what we assume is I can only be sexual and enjoy sex if I feel that drive internally. And so because I don't feel that drive internally, I cannot engage in sex. And so what these books are going to walk you through is there's such a thing as receptive desire. It's like, I didn't know that would feel good, but as we start to do this together, I'm noticing myself starting to get aroused. So I'm not starting with a desire, but I end up as we start to connect a little bit physically and we start to do that, it's starting to awaken that in me. And it's called receptive sexual desire. And so, but those books do a tremendous job. I really recommend you get one of those. Sit down. We tell couples all the time, read it aloud together. That's one of the coolest things you can do. Don't read it separate and then come and talk about it because you won't. Read it aloud together because that will get you talking about sex, engaging on this, talking about it, and then you're gonna guide you through some activities and things that you can do to start re-engaging the enjoyment of that connection with your spouse, and it'll be really good for you.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Shaun, for that advice. And hopefully that could encourage and answer this person's question. With that, we're going to kind of close out the episode. And it has just been so good to talk with you, Shaun.
Mhm.
I so admire your heart for couples and marriages. And it's definitely been really encouraging talking with you. I'd love to know if you have maybe just a few last words for maybe some couples, some marriages that are kind kind of tuning in today? What are some last words of encouragement for them?
Well, if I was going to say anything, I would just say, there's hope. When you're going through hard things, we face challenges and hardship in this life, and there's hope for that. And so I would just want to speak those words of encouragement. If you don't feel strong enough to hold that hope on your own, I invite you to let me hold that hope for you. Come see one of us at MCO. Come see me. Be happy to walk through that together.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to this week's episode of My Counselor Live. It's been so great getting to spend this time with you guys and interact with y'all in this way. And we will, as always, be back next week with another counselor for another episode of My Counselor Live. But thank you, Shaun, for tuning in with us today and answering so many questions and just talking with us today.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Awesome. We'll see you guys next week.